To me, this was the scene that just said everything between them.
Like, if they're not meant to be together, they're not meant to be together, but at least, like, do their story a service. At least, like...
Yes.
Hi, everyone. I'm Julie. She's Kelly, and we're here to find love. We're back again this week for another Bachelor recap. Today, we're recapping episode 9 of Joey's season of The Bachelor. For those of you who don't know us, we're two dating coaches who analyze the relationship psychology and dating themes in reality TV shows, especially The Bachelor. If you're into this kind of stuff, hit the subscribe button to follow along and join the conversation. You can also listen to us in podcast form on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
Okay, guys, it is Fantasy Suites week. So we had Rachel, Kelsey, and then Daisy doing their overnights with Joey. We're going to talk about them a little bit out of order. Let's start off with Kelsey because I feel like Kelsey is the one who most of us probably reacted to this date in the same way, which is, oh my gosh, they are so cute. And this is giving mega like husband-wife energy. I feel like a lot of people were just like, wow, it's actually very much there. And this is one of the first episodes that I think a lot of people really flipped the coin and really got on board of the Kelsey train because the chemistry was just off the charts. The whole date just felt so romantic. They were on a boat and just like chilling and talking, and then they had their overnight date. The next day they were like cooking in the eggs in the kitchen and the bacon and stuff. It was just like all kinds of cute, normal couple stuff. And I felt like this was just another example of they have just the easiest, most natural connection of all of the girls who have been on this season. These two just really have that steadiness that feels like real love, and this episode just kind of further emphasized that to me.
I was watching Joey look at Kelsey and I thought, oh my gosh, he is so physically attracted to her. On top of this emotional attraction they have, he could not stop touching her the entire episode. And he kept doing that thing again where, you know how guys will look at you when they want to kiss you and they always look at your lips?
He kept doing that.
He kept doing that. It made me feel kind of awkward.
But I think she liked it. I think she was into it.
She did like it. She was so into it. She was really so open-hearted about wanting to engage Joey that way, wanting to give him this affirmation, this validation, wanting to tell him that she wasn't just falling in love, which on The Bachelor is just like, you know, it's you have your guard up and you say that. She was completely in love with him.
Yeah.
And Joey really, really needed to hear that. It made him feel a lot more confident and a lot more calm for him to have that kind of reassurance from her. And he did speak a little bit about his fear of not being chosen, of feeling like he was going to get to the end of it and maybe the person would finally see him. He was a lot more forthcoming about that particular experience. And I do believe that Kelsey handled it pretty well the way that she responded to him. She was really frank and generous, and what I liked was when she was responding to him about that particular journey that he's on as a bachelor, she didn't try to say, and it's me that you should choose. She was like, if you really invest yourself in the process, you will be happy because it's the best thing for you. And I, you know, like I liked that. I liked that she kind of kept herself out of it and she made it about him and his experience, which he really needs. He really needs somebody to listen to him, reciprocate to him, and for them not to make it about themselves and what they're emotionally processing.
You're so right. I did actually notice this about Kelsey and Joey's date, in particular, actually, in comparison to all of them. Kelsey and Joey, something about their dynamic, it wasn't even necessarily that Kelsey was asking him questions, but Joey, you could just see him opening up to her. One thing that happened when they were on the boat is Kelsey mentioned that she's herself trying to get comfortable with being open with Joey, but then she showed or described like having this empathy for Joey and the fact that it's probably hard because he has to do it over and over with all of these different people, so it's even harder for him. And Joey seemed to really appreciate her just like seeing that struggle that he's going through. He seemed like he was like, well, thank you for saying that because yes, it's really hard. Like that was his reaction. And I thought that was so sweet. It really felt like there was just like a true seeing of each other that was really starting to happen. And specifically for Joey, I mean, this has been something that has been a bit of a struggle for him all season. It's like he is always holding space for the women. He's always like supporting the women as they're talking about really hard things. And we haven't actually had a lot of moments of Joey being able to open up on his dates to them. But this was one of the few times when I was like, oh, like Kelsey is kind of inquisitive and curious and thoughtful and empathetic about Joey's experience, and that is allowing Joey to come in as his authentic self in the date. And then it continued, like you said, in the evening portion of the date where he like totally opened up about, you know, all of his fears about not being chosen and so on and so forth. So it does feel like there is something about their connection that is now starting to transcend from just like the physicality and into like there is an emotional connection or like some kind of intimacy that is starting to form between them that is allowing Joey to actually open up, which is kind of what we've been waiting for all season. We've been wanting him to really be able to not just be the one to hold space for others, but to have someone else hold him. And it was kind of nice to see Kelsey, just by being herself, open that space up for him to do that. So I am more and more, like, I like this couple more and more. I just still kind of question whether or not they're going to end up together.
I know. Well, Joey does make it pretty confusing because I would say all three of the women that were left in this episode, they've all done that for Joey to some extent. They've been there for Joey when he was going through a really rough moment, or they acknowledged how he was holding space for not just them, but multiple people in the house, which is a super strength that he has. It's not easy to be as compassionate and empathetic as he is. And if that is a quality that has been exploited or overlooked in the past, it means so much more to him. And it makes it extra special when somebody sees that and they can like lift that and bring that to his attention. So that was what made it a little hard, was every part of this episode, he did show he had something deep with each of the women that he was connecting to, and they were giving him something that he needed to feel, and he was helping them open up and access this deeper level of vulnerability that all three of them, I believe, said they had never felt this way with the previous boyfriend before. So they're touching something really profound in their connection with him. To be touched and allow yourself to touch someone else in that way, this emotional core, that doesn't happen unless you're really able to be open. And I think Joey created that space. The woman co-created that space. So with Kelsey, even though I do like her, she is the front runner in terms of how she just seems like she has all of these elements that he really wants in a partner. I can see him choosing Rachel and Daisy as well, because I think he could have that with them too. It's just like, what are we seeing and what are we not seeing of editing? I'm not totally sure. But with Kelsey, we are seeing, I would say, maybe the full package.
We are seeing it. I just need to talk about this scene in the kitchen between Kelsey and Joey, because to me, this was the scene that just said everything between them. These two have been the couple that has been doing the most like actually romantic shit on this show. And there were so many people talking about this specific scene over on Twitter when he kind of lifts her up and puts her on the counter and then they start like making out.
So good.
Oh my God, it was so romantic. And I think that like people were saying it's like a Hallmark movie. It's like a rom-com scene. This moment was just so palpable. And I don't know what it is about scenes like this that like just titillate us like so much. I feel like people very often say that Joey is a man written by a woman, and obviously a straight woman, but it's just the way that, you know, of course he actively listens, he validates the woman's feelings, he responds to all those tricky situations with a lot of like, you know, care and thoughtfulness and open-heartedness and respect. And also the way he's like in touch with his own emotions and isn't afraid to be emotional. But then it's like scenes like this kitchen scene where it's like also just the way that he just is totally sinking into his connection with Kelsey in such a way that is so real. It's like the way he looks at her, it's the way he holds her, and he seems to just like really value her. I don't know, it's like intoxicating. It's like this is the kind of stuff that women love. I mean, it's so attractive to see a man so taken by a woman, and not just in this way of like lusting after her. Like there's physicality to it, but it goes so beyond that. There's like this desire and attraction that he has to her that is like very full to me. It's like, it feels like he's like attracted to like her essence, and there's this desire to like be connected to her, and that is so attractive to see in a man. So I feel like this was this scene really spoke to something. I think that's why so many people like really resonated with it. Oh my gosh, it just like awoke something inside of many of us.
Joey and Kelsey, that countertop scene, them making breakfast together in the morning. I love seeing their physical chemistry. I love seeing how open they are to each other. Like, who doesn't have that kind of fantasy of like just you're in a kitchen with somebody that you're really into and you're just making breakfast on a countertop and you're just breaking your eggs, you're giggling, you're laughing, they're carrying you around. It's just really nice.
It was such a moment.
Okay, so we see it between Joey and Kelsey. Do you see it between the two of them? Do you see them making it? Do you see her being the final rose? Let us know in the comments down below. If that kitchen scene had you swooning, then you are going to love the sponsor of today's video, Dipsea. If you're looking to add some spice to your me time, Dipsea is one of our favorite places to access thoughtfully crafted sexual stories. Dipsea is an app full of hundreds of short, sexy audio stories designed by women for women. These stories bring scenarios to life with immersive soundscapes and realistic characters, and they cater to women's desires specifically.
One thing about me, and I know from research that this is also true for a lot of women, is context really matters when it comes to getting in the mood. How turned on you feel kind of depends on the situation, not just how hot your partner is. It's like, where is this all happening? What is the connection between me and the person? And what has been the buildup up to this moment? And that storytelling part is the part that Dipsea just gets. My brain is lighting up when I'm listening to these stories, and so is my heart rate. We're talking second chance romances, friends to lovers storylines, vacation flings, exploring new interests with a long-term partner. There's even a bunch of fantasy series with vampires, Greek gods, and yes, fairy stuff. If you know, you know.
New content is released every week. You can find stories based on gender to find stuff aligned with who you are and who you're into, or search by narrator voice to specifically find Black voices, Asian voices, British accents, etc. For listeners of the show, Dipsea is offering an extended 30-day free trial when you go to dipseastories.com/here-to-find-love. That's 30 days of full access for free when you go to dipseastories.com/here-to-find-love. dipseastories.com/here-to-find-love. The link is in the description. Thank you again to Dipsea for sponsoring this video.
I guess the question mark then with Kelsey is, she sat down and had that conversation with Leslie from The Golden Bachelor.
Gosh.
And oh man, like that really created so much doubt in Kelsey's head. We find out that Kelsey is the one who has sent Joey the letter that has been teased all season. We don't know yet what is going to happen in that conversation. I sort of think that it's not going to be as dramatic as they're drumming it up to be, but clearly it did throw Joey into a bit of an emotional loop to receive that letter. I think it just freaked him out, especially because it's coming from Kelsey, someone that he really likes. But that Leslie conversation was kind of surprising because, so we had a Golden Bachelor lady come in and visit each of the final three. Leslie was just happened to be the one who visited Kelsey. Maybe not happened to be, maybe the producers specifically chose to have Leslie come in and talk to Kelsey, the person who has been the most confident the whole way through. And maybe that was literally the point. But Leslie came in and she basically was like, be careful with your heart, because I was so confident. I thought, I was so sure after Fantasy Suites that it was going to be me, and it wasn't me. So, you know, keep that kernel of realism in the back of your head. I was like, I don't know how to feel about this, because there's a realism that I appreciate, but in context, I was like, oh my God, you're gonna freak this girl out.
I know. I mean, you said it before we started filming. You were like, oh, I bet Julie didn't like this scene. And I hated that scene. I love the Golden Bachelor ladies. I just don't know if they were super useful in the context of this episode. It felt like they were teasing it for the Golden Bachelorette versus actually giving the woman any kind of substantial advice or support, or because that's what you need. You need support. You're in such a vulnerable position of, am I being chosen? He has relationships with all of these other people. What's going on? In that moment, you kind of need somebody to kind of give you confidence, but also give you the love and nurturing of you're going to be fine no matter what happens, which could have been better serviced as a friend. And in particular of Leslie, I think that Leslie's past experience, what really frustrates me, and I have like a personal bone to pick with this, is I think that when somebody's holding space, they have a responsibility to hold space in a way that the other person needs. There's an intention that you set when you're talking to somebody that is asking for something or needs something in a moment. If you put your crap into it, then the other person has to deal with it. Like, Leslie was hurt from Gary, so she was like, don't be hurt from this guy. That is so not Kelsey's problem. That is not what's happening between her, Kelsey, and Joey. That could be, but I think to the severity that Leslie was putting that into Kelsey's field to now deal with, that felt a little bit like enmeshment. It felt a little icky. It kind of like makes me upset when people in my life hold space for me like that. Like, they put their personal stuff into it, or they think, this is how I love you. I want to protect you. Therefore, put your guard up. It's not their problem. Like, this is how you're handling your life, and you need support the way that you need support. And Kelsey needed to feel like she could continue to open up to Joey, who is uniquely a bachelor, where if you put your guard up, that is the exact thing that will push him away from you. If there is any kind of doubt or resistance, Joey will feel that, and it will make him back off in an experience where every emotion is so potent and every emotion is so strong for him and the person to feel. I understand that she's giving her past experience about what happened with Gary, but it obviously had Kelsey spiral in a way that we hadn't really seen her before. And she had already kind of communicated, I felt insecure in the past about, you know, the date that they went on, where they had that big group date and they were eating sausages, wherever that location was, Amsterdam or something. You know, she already felt insecure about it. So Kelsey is prone to that level of fear. I don't know, like, it just wasn't useful because she was maybe the most, I would say, straightforward about just her being expressive with Joey. And at the end, it did turn it enough to the point where she was like, we need to talk. And I do think that you're right. The note wasn't, I'm leaving the show. It's not like a Maria kind of exit where Maria was doing it to be like, is this connection true? She may be asking him to talk because she needs reassurance so she can continue on to the next phase. And, you know, like, would they speak again? They would speak again at the rose ceremony. So I actually think that how Joey handles that conversation between him and Kelsey will be a huge indicator of how much he likes her. If he's really spacious and generous and hears her out and is not freaked out by it, is able to stay strong despite her wavering, it will show that he really sees her in his future. But if he is turned off by it, that means that maybe he already saw a red flag and this was another red flag that will make him back away. What did you think about the whole Leslie thing?
I mean, I agree with everything you said, that it just was so not what Kelsey needed from that conversation.
So unhelpful.
And you can see that it actually made things kind of worse for Kelsey. It is sad, honestly, to see that they had such a good connection and now it might like kind of get rocked because of this specific conversation. You're right. Basically what it boils down to is one person, a friend, kind of not able to hold space for Kelsey in the way that she needed. Now, the actual advice that Leslie gave, it's tricky because I think a lot of people are like, God, she's being so negative. And in reality, what she's actually saying is true, right? In any relationship, until you like really are like know what's kind of going on, you do kind of want to keep a little bit of like a realism in your head about, you know, where this relationship may or may not go. And especially on The Bachelor, it's like you have a 1 in 3 chance of ending up with Joey, but a 2 in 3 chance of going home. It's literally just the math of it. So it does make sense what she's saying. However, it really just kind of comes down to what you said. It's like, what does Kelsey actually need from this conversation? Will this actually benefit her? Maybe it all comes down to like packaging of information too, and like how information is shared, because you can hold the realism of, yes, this relationship may not work out, with the hope and optimism and excitement. You can hold both of those things. But clearly something about the way that conversation went, Kelsey was kind of like just kind of only walked away with this part of it without enough of this part of it. And especially to your point, in this process, in the Bachelor process, most people, the thing that they are often struggling with is well, actually, they struggle with one of the two things. Either opening up enough and leading into the relationship enough and not having their guards up, or they're being a little bit too maybe ignorant about what the process, they're a little bit too lost in the fantasy. And one of these two things tends to be what's going on for a contestant in the show. And, you know, I guess it takes maybe someone wise enough to sit down with any given contestant and kind of understand what it is that that person needs to hear. And Leslie just kind of couldn't get it from Kelsey. Well, I don't know. It's like tricky to say, because I don't think Kelsey's lost in the fantasy personally. I think they actually have a great connection. So it's like, did she actually need that piece of advice? I'm not sure. She doesn't seem lost in the fantasy. She doesn't seem to be struggling with opening up. It felt like she's been like right there in the middle. She's been
very centered.
Yeah,
exactly.
So it's like kind of like she didn't actually need either of these things, and maybe that was really the true fault, the true thing that Leslie made a mistake with, is just not actually understanding, to your point, Julie, what Kelsey actually needed, which was really neither of those things. She just needed support and validation that her journey is going well.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, that's such a great point that you made, because it kind of goes back to this, when you have this strong sense of self, which I believe Kelsey does have during this process. She's able to be open. She's able to be vulnerable. She does have a guard enough up where she is like, I am realistic that you are dating other people, and yet I've spoken to my family, I've spoken to my dad, and I understand that this is a connection I need to be open about. It's so realistic that you don't need to have your bubble burst, and you don't need to, so you can be grounded, and you don't need to be hyped up so you can give in more to that. So when you're quite balanced like that, you just need somebody that's like, okay, like, do your thing, trust yourself.
You're doing great.
You're doing great. Like, this was my experience and what I went through, but this is your experience, and I believe that if you know yourself and you're making the right decisions, just keep on doing that. And it's not like Leslie did anything wrong or made mistakes with how she held space for her. I just think that she was a little bit... did she say something where she was like, oh, Kelsey just kind of reminds me of me, where she just thought she could have been
She did.
chosen.
She said something exactly like that.
It felt like projection to me. And I just have like a personal pet peeve with that kind of stuff where I'm like, dang, like if you really just listen to somebody, or if you're really paying attention or asking them questions, that being a listening space that is able to really nurture somebody the way that they want, it takes a little bit more skill, but it's infinitely more helpful at just helping the person receive what they wanted. And Leslie, I think that she just really wanted to make sure that Kelsey wouldn't get hurt in the process, but Kelsey knows the risk that she's in right now. And I truly do believe that her connection with Joey is the strongest. It would have to be something that she does that would push it away. And this is the exact thing that's happening. Because, like, he hates people saying they might leave or they need to talk. Or we saw him at the end of the episode. He was so, like, worked up about it.
I know.
He was really upset. So I was
so
like,
upset.
Oh, man.
I feel for Leslie because, honestly, it's, like, very much like... I think a lot of people would go in with that exact kind of thought process or attitude of like, I am trying to just like straight shoot, give my actual thoughts on the situation. And Kelsey just kind of didn't really ask for it. Like, and that's the thing. It's like, you need to like pay attention to like what the person is asking for. If she's like, tell me honestly, do you think I'm making a mistake in the way I'm approaching the situation? Maybe that would be a different story, but Kelsey didn't ask for that, and that's kind of where the whole thing kind of gets mucky.
So how do you think that Leslie handled that conversation with Kelsey? Do you think that's what Kelsey needed to hear in the moment? Tell us down below and let's talk. So it's time to go to Daisy's portion of the date. They had a really cute, was it an ATV date? They did something in the jungle where he was like, you know, she was riding behind him. It was really seductive. There was weird sexy music playing in the background.
No, they were like in a shower.
Yeah, there was something about the connection of Daisy. They do have something quite nice together. I don't have so much to say about them as a couple because it just seems to be fairly consistent. There is something between the both of them that kind of goes beyond words. It might be like a presence thing, but I feel like she gives Joey the gratitude and appreciation that he really needs. And I don't even think she's doing it intentionally. But I noticed towards the end, like they had this really cute activity date, then they had their dinner date where they got very emotional, and he was opening up to her about his fear of not being chosen. And she had a very similar fear. She didn't make it about herself, which I really liked. She was able to just tell Joey that she understood. And he was like, there is this felt sense of understanding between me and Daisy that she just sees right through me. She's able to really get where I'm at emotionally. And I was noticing it during their date. It's like, they're not having these weighted, heavy conversations. It's like they're just in each other's presence, and it feels very easy and relaxed. And I would say that sums up how I see the relationship. There's something that they're experiencing chemically in person that is drawing them together, because I don't know if I see her being stronger than Kelsey per se, but there is something about the both of them where I'm like, there's something that they're definitely picking up on in person.
Yeah, I think that must be what it is, because personally, watching these two, I'm always like a little bit like mid on them. I never feel like the connection is very exciting to me, but you're right, they're playing the sexy music. Clearly, by the things that they're saying, it's clear that it's moving forward. Joey said that he's falling in love with her, so it's clearly there is something there that they are experiencing in the moment.
Yeah.
The other piece of it is, I think I'm now starting to like, there's a lot of stuff coming out about Daisy related to her politics and things like that, and I am just starting to, I feel like, maybe view her a little bit differently. I was wondering in their overnight, like, did some of that stuff come up? Is that what they did they talk about any of these things? Because they do have, from what we are surmising from internet snooping, they have different politics, and Fantasy Suites is usually like the time where this kind of stuff can come up. The stuff that Joey said about feeling really positive about Daisy, it all happened prior to their overnight. After their overnight, it was still good, but I was like, did this come up? Like, will this be a factor? Is it a factor? I don't know. So I'm not sold on these two. And, to your point, I do think that he was opening up to her, and he does seem to have a lot of appreciation for the way that she appreciates him. It was very funny. She said that thing of Joey changed her life and the way she sees herself because he wants to date her despite her hearing loss in her cochlear implant. And Joey seemed so touched by that. He even said in the moment interview, he was like, it makes me feel so good to hear that I've changed her life. Like, the way he said that, it was very like, me? I'm a good boy? Like, I am? I did it? I'm a good boyfriend? Like, that was what the vibe of their conversation was. And that's exactly what he had been talking to her about how in his past relationship, not with Charity, but with someone else from, I think, Hawaii, he talked about the fact that he didn't feel confident about being a good boyfriend. So I think Daisy kind of laying it on thick on him of you've changed my life, you're such a good boyfriend. I think it's really making him feel very validated and kind of speaking to something that he struggles with and that he really yearns for, which is to be seen as doing a good job and being enough. That's, I think, something that's so important to him. And Daisy is really giving it to him in this really big way. Kelsey and Rachel are obviously both so into him as well, but something about the way Daisy is kind of putting it into the context of her whole life of how this experience is changing her life, I think is maybe speaking to him.
Yeah, and when I was watching last night's episode, I was watching it with my partner, and he hasn't been watching this season. So he was like, she's kind of making her emotional state and how she's feeling based on how he's making her feel. And I was like, oh, that's a really interesting point. Because when Kelsey's like, I'm happy, she says, I'm happy. Daisy will say, you make me happy. This makes me happy. Your words make me happy. So it's there's this direct causation that Joey is doing to Daisy, where Daisy is being impacted by him specifically. And that could be something that he is really desiring. He hasn't said it specifically, but I noticed a lot during last night's episode, she's kind of attached to him in that way, in a way that he might really desire. And I hadn't really seen that before. There is something about, I think the way that she makes Joey feel so good by her letting him know, you make me feel good. And then that like feeds into this thing together. I'm not sure because I don't totally see it either. I can see her making it towards... Yeah, I could see her being final two for sure. I think that she still is a little bit too, and some of our commenters were saying this last week, I think she's a little bit too, like she's in a different life phase to really be looking for the kind of commitment that Joey's looking for.
I agree. I do still feel, I felt that way in this episode too. I was like,
yeah,
I just wonder if she just didn't come on the show actually thinking that she was going to make it far. Like, I sort of wonder if she came on the show and it was just kind of like, this is a cool thing to do. It's cool that I'm able to do this considering my health was so bad a year ago. And like, now I have this opportunity. Yeah. I'm going to go on this show and have this really cool experience. I'm going to get to talk about my story, which is like so important to bring awareness to. This is such a cool opportunity to do that. But I almost kind of wonder if maybe she didn't even actually think about, oh, I could be the one who gets engaged in the end. And now she's like, do I like Joey? Okay, yeah, I think I like Joey. Okay, yeah, maybe I'll get married, sure. And it's like a little bit like, there's like a randomness to it all, and that's why she's also like getting so emotional about like, oh my gosh, wait, someone actually likes me. Because I almost feel like she just like wasn't even in that headspace of like thinking that this was all gonna pan out this way. So, you know, now she's at the end and she's got to figure out what she's gonna do. You know, she's just gonna go with it. Like maybe she is.
That's a really, really good observation that you made about Daisy, because it does seem like, I mean, I feel like most of these people, yeah, there's an opportunity to be in love, but come on, let's be real. You went on the show because you wanted some kind of exposure, and she reminds me a little bit of Cassie Randolph. And not in a way where she doesn't like, because I don't think she was that into Colton, but she was like, whoa, Cohen's really into me. I think there is a little bit of a surprise of, whoa, the lead really likes me. I really like him. Okay, like I'm just falling into it a little bit. That kind of seems to be the kind of energy that I'm getting from Daisy. It's a little bit too, in my opinion, happy, like lackadaisical for me of just, I'm stumbling into this engagement. I love that.
That is what it feels like. It's like, all right, here I am. I'm doing it. I'm engaged.
I'm just tripping into it. I'm falling in love. Yeah, and she kept saying it. Falling in love is fun. I don't know. I think there has to be something a little bit deeper to it. So not completely seeing them. If we're missing something, guys, let us know in the comments down below. Please. Or tell us if there's a scene that you see that you want us to look at again, because I think that they feel really good around each other. I think they make each other really happy. But does that make a marriage? That's just a tiny part of it, you know? It's a big part, but it is a small part. There's like a lot of other things that need to line up.
I'm with you.
By the way, if you watched this point in the video and you're not subscribed to our channel yet, hit that subscribe button. We do this every single week and recap every single episode of The Bachelor, The Bachelorette, and so on. So you should subscribe and follow along.
Okay, so that takes us into the Rachel of it all. Rachel was actually the first date, but I feel like there's like the most to say about her, especially given everything that's been happening on social media. Rachel's been getting so much flack, which we'll get into it. But let's talk about her date first, because I think on this date we got a lot more of a picture of Rachel kind of finally painted, all starting with her little conversation with Susan. It felt like that conversation, as opposed to the Leslie Kelsey one, the Susan Rachel one was very sweet. It felt like Susan was really tapping into something that was actually very true for Rachel, and Susan kind of understood something that Rachel had going on, which is that she had this guard up, and she's had this guard up, and she is kind of struggling to lean in and actually be hopeful for her relationship with Joey working out. And so I feel like Susan actually picked the right way to support Rachel, but that was kind of the backdrop for it all, because Rachel is in this date kind of already in an emotional place by the time she comes in to be with Joey. And then they have this accident where they're diving off of these like high, you know, platforms into the water, and she like busts her jaw, or something happens to her jaw, and it kind of derails the energy of their date. And she was already, I think, really feeling like this is do or die. I really got to make sure that me and Joey are connecting on this date. And it was totally happening at the beginning. Like, he was in this like really cute, playful mood with her. They were in the water and like really just kind of vibing. She was looking like a smoke show in that bathing suit. It was like all kind of happening. And then to have that like moment of, just like hitting her jaw that completely takes the date off. You can even see she's just trying to not let it spin off into that. She's like really trying to maintain the energy of the date as much as she can. But Joey's like, seems like I'm asking you if you're okay, and you're just like, no, but then touching your jaw. And he's like calling that out of her. He's kind of like seeing her in this way that really indicates they have this kind of closeness, and he feels close enough to her to be able to call this out of her and kind of call her on her BS, essentially. And so they end up going to the hospital, and even though that connection was so there, it felt like the hospital part, like Rachel starts to just spiral. She just like gets in her head about it. She seems like she just doesn't know what this is going to mean for their fantasy suites, because now they've lost time, and she needed the time, and that was something that she was so worried about. Like, are they going to be able to get that spark? And now she's like in her head about it, and I feel like this is where it all kind of starts to go south. And their connection, by the time of the evening portion of the date, it feels like she's so emotional that Joey kind of has to shift from being in fun, playful zone and into a place of like, let me like hold space for you once again. And so that has been something that he's been doing for other women. And the thing is, the beauty of his relationship with Rachel is that he hasn't been having to do that with Rachel. And like the two of them have been in a place where actually Rachel has been kind of holding space for Joey. But now the table turns kind of right at the wrong time, like right where they really need to lean into being playful is exactly the time that Rachel just kind of happens to have this accident and a little bit of an emotional like, breakdown over it. And she had been so steady the whole time that it kind of is sad, honestly, that the timing worked out this way. It's like she was holding him down for so long, and like they just like traded places at just such an inopportune moment. And I kind of feel like this is going to be a nail in the coffin for them, because the energy was just like so like serious and intense by the end of this date. Even the next morning after the fantasy suites, it seemed like a lot of their time was spent on kind of tending to Rachel's kind of stress about the situation. And unfortunately, I just don't think that's going to beat out how kind of sparkly feeling the other two fantasy suites were. So to me, this felt like a little bit of a, it's almost like, it's just sad that it happened this way.
Yeah, and it was a bummer because I've always really liked Rachel the entire season. I loved their connection together. I think she had such amazing natural confidence, great chemistry with Joey. She was the first person, I think, to really hold space for him in a way where he was being like, wow, I feel received, it feels fun, I feel this banter. But interestingly enough, to just add some dimension to your observations, which I totally agree with, I thought she went into the date of Joey a little bit in her head. She just seemed like her body language was a little bit like armored. They were doing the jumping date. She was like, okay, let's just jump. And I noticed like she wasn't asking for reassurance. He was kissing her for luck, and then he leaned in for another kiss, and she was like, oh, you need another kiss? But she said it in a way where it felt like she was in her head, and she just wasn't. It just was one of those things where we know why she has her guard up, and it's because of what she explained during her Golden Bachelor time. She had been cheated on twice, and she has a fear of not being picked because that has happened historically in her past relationships, and now she's in a position where all of her wounds are being activated because he is the Bachelor and he's dating two other people. So that energy, she definitely brought it with her on the date. And I noticed even when they were jumping, they weren't holding hands, and I was like, that's so not like how Joey and Rachel typically are. Like they're usually quite affectionate with each other. She's very engaging of eye contact, and she is wanting to bridge the closeness. Yeah, but I didn't notice it with like that beginning portion. And then when she hurt her jaw, I've noticed this when you're kind of around somebody and they're feeling uncomfortable or they're feeling something, but they're not saying it. But it's so palpable in the room. It's like something is going on. Then her jaw happened, and she's like, it's okay, but she can't even talk. And she's a nurse. I was like, Rachel, like, I mean, obviously, like, she went to get x-rays. Nothing was wrong with her jaw. Like, she didn't break it, but she did receive an injury when she hit the water with her face. And she wasn't able to be honest with Joey about, my jaw hurts. Oh, like, I just really wanted today to go perfect. She couldn't communicate all of those things until hours after they were in the hospital. And at that time, emotionally, that takes a lot of energy to hold when you're just trying to get something out of somebody and they're not letting you, they're not telling you. I do think that was a nail in the coffin of Joey being like, please tell me what's going on. Please tell me that you're not okay. Please tell me about your jaw. Please get some ice. And she isn't caving. And for me, that would be kind of exhausting. If I'm just like, please tell me that something's wrong, or I see it, something is wrong. And they're like, no, it's okay. Then you just keep having to pull it from them. But I think by the time the date was actually warming up and she was able to open up, Joey, or maybe this is my projection, it just seemed a little bit like weary or worn down of like, this is such a heightened day. I'm making such a big decision. And is this what it takes for you to be honest about something you're physically experiencing or emotionally experiencing? So I don't know. Like that was kind of, that would be my read of the situation of like, I felt like Rachel had a really big guard up and her not able to be open to Joey, who is maybe one of the easiest people to be open to about this stuff. They've had the past experience to have that built-in trust. So for Rachel not to meet it in that moment was such a bummer, because I just thought if she was really able, and I'm not saying that she could have done anything differently, but if there was an openness of her just being more upfront about it, it would have just, there is all of this tension in the date, and it would have just been diffused if she was like, yes, my jaw hurts. Yes, I'm feeling all of this stuff. Yes, I had this one-on-one with the Golden Bachelorette ladies, and I am feeling really in my head about this. It's bringing up a lot of stuff in my past, and I can't help but bring the present into this moment, because that's why I'm not being present, because I am focusing on the past. Like there wasn't that conversation, you know?
You know what? Like, it's so tough because at this, it's like, I think you're totally right. I think what it all kind of comes down to is I think that her confidence was just like a little bit shaky by this point in the process. This whole time, she's been like such a confident person. She's so steady. She comes into every situation with just such a vibe about her, where she just like is in her element. She has her emotions kind of managed, not like bottled up, but she just can manage herself so well. And in this scene, to me, the problem wasn't that she didn't talk about it with him, because I think that there is a sense with these fantasy suite dates, you're at the end, but like, it's so precious to have a good time. Like, and it reminded me of Zach and Katie's fantasy suite date, where Zach took it upon himself to tell Katie that he had slept with Gabby. And that kind of like derailed the whole front end of his fantasy suite date with Katie. And Katie was basically like, honestly, you didn't need to tell me this.
Yeah.
She was like, because now I'm just in my head and in a bad mood. And it just matters so much that I'm in a good mood for this, so we can enjoy this time together, because the time is so limited. And that was like her issue, was just like really catering to like, what kind of connection, what kind of energy, what kind of experience can we have? And I think Rachel was a little bit in that mindset too, of like, I really want us to have like a good time today. Like, we're gonna like, you know, just be swimming around in this like cool pool, and we're gonna be like, I don't know, having intimate time in the fantasy suites. I just want to be in a good headspace. And then for all of these doubts to start creeping in, and then for her to feel like she couldn't talk to Joey about it, to me what that signaled was her confidence had just wavered, because it kind of became,
that's true.
If I tell Joey about this, it's going to ruin my chances of getting, you know, through to the next round. And I think she had lost her confidence a little bit, and it wasn't so much to me that she didn't talk to him about it, but it was what that signaled, which was that she was no longer feeling like confident in her relationship with Joey. And I think she is wavering, and he's so good at holding space for people. But you're right, by the time of that evening portion, it was like he did seem exhausted. It did seem like, I mean, maybe to that point Rachel was right. Like, I think he did want to have a good time, and like she knew that once she opened up this bottle of emotions, it was gonna spiral. And I mean, she was right. It went so poorly after she opened up, and like you know, it's like she was right about it. But to your point, it's like if she had just opened up, but she had been confident about it and been like, this is what's in my head, and I know that we have something, but this is just what's in my head, and like been able to do it in a way that wasn't saddled with like this insecurity, then I think it would have went a lot better. But because it was so saddled with those insecurities, I think Joey was put into a tough position of he can't assuage her insecurities at this juncture because he's still making a decision between the three women of who he's going to take. So he can't just sit there and be like, don't worry, trust what we have. Like, he can't actually sit there and say that. So he's now in this really tough position of, how do I comfort her without necessarily giving her assurances that I'm going to pick her? That puts him in a really weird place. And so the whole dynamic was so messy.
Yeah, it's kind of like emotional jiu-jitsu at that point, because what you said about the confidence, when you're saying it, I thought, I wish the expectation had been, let's get closer versus let's have a good time. Because expectations on dates, on any big event, if you're like, this has to be the best date of my life, something will let you down, because it's impossible to have that black and white judgment of something for it to completely be positive. I mean, we all have it. We all do this thing where we go into something and we're like, it has to be the best time. It has to be this. It has to be that. It has to deepen this thing. But I genuinely feel like Joey, because he is this emotionally intelligent bachelor, yes, he wanted to have a good time, but more he wanted to get closer to Rachel. And when he realized that she got into this accident, that good time was going to be punctuated by this moment of caretaking, that he was absolutely fine with it. It was when she wasn't able to really, it took her time to even let him know about the job. So it took time to even get to that place of, let's just go to the hospital and let's just figure this out and let's just get into it. And it's emotions. She was dealing with a lot. So there's absolutely no fault on Rachel at all. But that was something I realized in their date of, oh man, I could just see it when they're leaving the hospital. Joey just had this like heavy expression on his face. And it wasn't from taking care of Rachel, because he would do that for somebody that he absolutely cares about. It was just a lot. With everything that you were saying. How do I take care of her? How do I not guarantee it when I don't know yet? He's managing a lot as well. And I felt bad watching this episode after the backlash that happened for her last week, with everything happening in Maria and the internet really piling onto her, and how people don't see her connection to Joey, because she does have a connection to Joey. And this is why it's so hard for her to be vulnerable. When you're this close to feeling this connected to somebody and you know they could hurt you, of course, all of your insecurities are going to rush to the surface, because now you're in a safe space where you can unpack those things. That's why Rachel was so vulnerable on this date, because it's so real to her. It's so real to her to open up to him about these things. She can't be detached from it anymore. Before this week happened, production and editing just really didn't give enough space for her love story of Joey. And that does come down to the producers not really knowing how to handle her race, not knowing how to handle, how do we highlight her story, not really presenting the idea that Joey could be interested in somebody like Rachel, even over somebody like Maria. And I felt like last week, a lot of the backlash about Rachel in particular was about her looks and about the validity of her connection to Joey. It was hard to watch, because I saw how much she cared about Joey this week, and I feel like she's not going to really get it. The backlash is not going to really be let up in any way.
I agree. It was so frustrating to me to have this episode air right after that whole backlash that she received. And it's so frustrating, because you're right. Up until this episode, their connection has actually been so strong. Like, literally, they have had so much going on with their connection that has been unique and different from all the other relationships. So it was so irritating to me all of last week, just seeing people be so dismissive toward Rachel and her relationship with Joey. And, you know, to me, it does, to your point, it has such strong racial overtones, the way people keep having to comment on social media, being like, there's no chemistry between them, there's nothing between them. Look, the way people are so emphatic about that. And, you know, obviously in this episode, Joey did take steps forward with Kelsey and Daisy in terms of saying that he's falling in love with them. And he did not do that with Rachel. So now we kind of know where his roses are likely headed in the next rose ceremony. But prior to this episode, Rachel and Joey have had such an amazing, identifiably strong connection, and people's unwillingness to see that, to me, it just really does boil down to a little touch of casual racism. I mean, their romantic dance on the very first group date, that was after the limo
Insane.
entrances, the next date, they had that romantic dance. He picked her out of the crowd as the person that he wanted to connect more deeply with. And then just like their super goofy and effortless banter throughout the season, the way that she was the first one, actually, that he was able to tap into that goofy side with. As opposed to all the other girls, you know, he was in a little bit of like a caretaking zone. With Rachel, she was the one that he was able to kind of get into a little bit of like a hang zone. And then you brought this up, but Rachel was also the first one to kind of tap into that desire that Joey has to be seen for his uglier sides. On that one group date kind of recently where she like told him that she knows that he's going to overthink all of this and that's something that he does. And he seemed so kind of moved by the fact that she could see that part of him that's like not so perfect. He seemed very moved by that. So there have been all of these really salient moments actually between them, but they're so far and few in between. To your point, it's like such a non-focus of production and of the whole story of the season that people kind of like didn't absorb it. And then the other part of it is, frankly, that just, you know, people just didn't want to absorb it, right? I do think that these two had the vibes, and people, because of that kind of just casual subconscious racism, I think people just like didn't want to believe that their beautiful white boy, like perfect man written by a woman, would be interested in a brown girl with dark skin and curly hair. I think there's a subconscious part of us that like just people just doubt that that could ever be a thing, because that's what the nature of those comments were. Like it all boiled down to there's no way he could be into someone like her. And yeah, to me, the casual racism is just the undertone of it all. I just think that is the reason why people are so flabbergasted over the idea that Joey could like Rachel, and people refuse to believe it. It's like both that kind of subconscious, just like racist belief that it would never happen, and then also production not featuring their love story. It's that combination of things that has contributed to this. And then we get this episode where we actually see it all fall apart, and it's like, it's just, I'm so frustrated by it all. It's just so, it makes me so mad.
It made me really frustrated too, because their connection on this date felt like the most realistic of, this happens in relationships where somebody doesn't want to open up and the other person does hold space for them and they expand on that moment, and that's how they get closer. The show format just doesn't really allow for that, because you have one day, one night. So there is a ticking clock of, okay, you're moving towards the afternoon, now it's fantasy suites, and that's it. Now you got to make a decision. So there is no spaciousness for Rachel and Joey's relationship to really thrive in, which made me so sad, because I wish that the show had at least done a service to Rachel's story by really highlighting her connection to Joey in a way where people could have seen that Joey has been very, very interested in Rachel from the jump. The date that they had during the wedding date when she did the ceremony, I remember how Joey looked at Rachel. It was such a palpable, wow, this is the person I want to be with. I want to be with someone that's so eloquent and so confident, and someone that is able to make my life feel exciting and fun and have pizzazz to it. Those are all things that Rachel still possesses, just like these other qualities of, I have been hurt and I need somebody to be there for me. It felt like they were kind of on a race against time, and they just didn't have enough time for this to really unfurl the way that it needed to. And I do blame it on production. I blame it on production not really knowing how to have a love story outside of like white people. And there is something about Joey obviously now picking, it seems quite obvious that Kelsey and Daisy will be the final two, because he did say that he loved them. The show not knowing how to have a love story outside of white people makes me think about the stories that I watched growing up, where you always saw two white people falling in love, and there was always a black best friend, there was always an Asian best friend, maybe crushing on the lead character, but there was never this interaction where these stories were presented and centered in a meaningful way. Rachel's story has still not been presented and centered in a meaningful way. Her love story is questioned. It's not valid. It's not seen as something real or as meaningful as his connections of women that already went home. Feedback and backlash that she is still receiving I saw that like her Instagram is not even growing. Like people are just not really paying attention to her story because it has been completely neglected. There hasn't been any interest in her and in how she views love with him. So I don't know. Like there's just so much racism from production. I am really frustrated by now how her story is being handled, because it's very likely that she's going to go home and her love story would just kind of be relegated to, like, people are just going to forget about that and they're going to move on from it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so frustrating because you're right. Now it's going to be like, oh, he was just never into her. And I just think that's like literally not true. And I think the reason that people are having that reaction is because she's in the top 3. He kept her there. There was so many wonderful women, and she's the top 3. She was his pick. And I think you're right. It really comes down to these two things. One, just production refused to center her story, refused to center their relationship. They chose not to put their meaningful moments front and center of the storyline. And number 2, it's just that I think people can't actually wrap their heads around this. I want to also address this thing with like Maria. I think people were so upset about the fact that Joey chose to keep Rachel over Maria. And I think people were like upset about like that little exchange they had, the rose ceremony, and, you know, thought that Rachel was being rude to Maria. But it was honestly such a low key and such a non-moment that it really just feels like such an overreaction from the fan base to hook onto that and make that like an explanation for why they don't like Rachel. And then it just dovetails into this whole, they don't have a connection, like she should just go home. It's like people are really trying to enforce the fact that Rachel should not be here. Rachel does not deserve to be here. That's really what the message is that is being pushed out, that people like her don't end up here. And like, I think it's so hard to not see the racial undertones that are in this dynamic. And I think that it's really hard to acknowledge that the racism might be part of why people respond this way. I think a lot of people, I'm sure, are gonna even come in our comments and be like, no, I feel really strongly that there's not a connection between Rachel and Joey. Like, I just really feel that way. It has nothing to do with race. I'm sure people are gonna come in our comments and say that. And I just ask you to just really sit and interrogate why you feel the need to just really hammer in that point. Why is it so important to you to make other people like really see that there is no connection between Joey and Rachel? I think like, I don't know. It's so weird for people to just feel so strongly that I need to make known that I don't believe there's a connection between this white dude and this brown girl. And honestly, part of me feels like if Rachel was like a white blonde but had the exact same amount of screen time and storyline with Joey, the reaction would be so different. The perception of her would be so different. And I just think that vitriol towards her, that desire people are having to like explain that these two don't have a connection, is just so outsized in a way that it's just really hard to imagine it's based on anything other than the fact that she is brown. We need to reinforce the fact that brown girls are unattractive, and that's just what it's giving to me.
And it's even people that can't see the connection between Rachel and Joey. It's because they haven't seen love stories like this play out on The Bachelor. So they're like, historically, there is this subtext or there is this unconscious bias that we haven't seen this on the show, and therefore she is not a considerable match for him because we've never seen it on the show, which is why it was so important that production had a responsibility to highlight a real developing connection between Rachel and Joey instead of letting it fall off the rails like it did, where like if they're not meant to be together, they're not meant to be together, but at least like do their story a service, at least like show people that Joey was really interested in Rachel instead of making it seem like they just don't have any connection, any chemistry, because we're just not seeing enough of it. I absolutely believe that it was the right move for him to send home Maria, because outside of his fun connection of Maria, there was nothing else. What he had of Rachel was so grounded in something real. The real evidence to it was her being so scared to open up to him about this very real fear that she had. If she wasn't afraid, if she wasn't connected to him, if it didn't mean something to her, she would just say that story and it wouldn't impact her deeply. But for her to really feel like, you can hurt me, there was something real there. We didn't get to see it. All we saw was her have this episode where she was in the hospital figuring out her jaw stuff, telling Joey about it later, that's all we saw. We didn't see the weeks and weeks before of them building this connection where she finally felt safe enough to tell you, I am in this place because you can now affect me.
You're so right. Oh, God. I just, it makes me so frustrated. I'm so frustrated with production. Honestly, I'm a little frustrated with the fan base and the way that they're, I mean, if you look at any Instagram post from the like Bachelor accounts that features Rachel, I mean, the comments are like bad. Like they're real, like ugly. And, you know, some people are even being pretty direct to your point about talking about they're like talking about Rachel's looks. Of course, other people are being a little bit more like subtle about it. They're being just like, oh, well, I just don't see a connection between them. Like that's kind of the commentary. But it's like, I think I also take this really personally, like as a brown girl who is married to a white boy. And of course, I'm a light-skinned chick. I'm still Filipino and Indian, but very much not white. And I know that dark-skinned girlies have it much worse than me. But even me, I feel like I experience this all the time when like me and my white partner are like out in public or in social settings. People just don't believe that we're like a couple. People just don't believe that we are together. You can just tell from the looks on people's faces, the way that they talk to us. So rude. And it really just, it feels like it's the same thing that's kind of happening with the Rachel and Joey connection. Just people are just dismissing it. They just don't want to open their minds to just believe that maybe he just fucking likes her. Maybe he just thinks she's hot. Maybe he just like really thinks she's cool and interesting and incredible and funny. Like people can't open their minds to that. And I don't know. That's why I'm so bothered by it. And I think we should all be bothered by it. Honestly, there's no reason to be loudly and publicly calling into question a brown girl's desirability. Like point blank, there's just no reason to do it. It just, to me, it's like we're, God, just to take a like one step further, it's like we're so brainwashed into seeing white people as inherently the most attractive race. I think that's the brainwashing that we all have. And we actually have to put in the work to combat that because it's brainwashing. It's obviously not true. Everyone's attractive people of all races. Everyone's attractive. Like there's no one group of people, one skin tone that's the most attractive. And we just have to like put in the work to kind of get that bullshit out of our brain. And part of that is just adjusting the way that you think about and talk about Black, brown, and other people of color. Like that's just what it takes. And the fact of the matter, like it's literally a fact. Rachel is just fucking bomb. She's stunning. She's gorgeous. She's smart. And it's like, it makes absolute fucking sense that Joey would be into her. It just does. If you are questioning it, I really do think there is an element of unlearning that needs to happen to help you open your mind and just accept that he liked her. He kept her all the way to the top 3. And like, if you are finding that incomprehensible, you got to interrogate why that is. What is happening inside you that made it so hard for you to see their connection?
I love it. And I really appreciate this very race-conscious conversation that we're having because racism does play a part in dating dynamics, and it played a part in the dating dynamics, not even between Joey and Rachel. It played it with how people perceived Joey and Rachel. There has been absolutely no sense of them not being able to move past this obstacle. We saw how he was able to really embrace her traditions when he met her family. There was no sense of him being like, this is an obstacle, this is something that I'm seeing, this is something that I'm not attracted to. It's just how people are perceiving them, and most importantly now how Rachel is being perceived. And she has already gone through enough in this journey where she is on a show where it is exactly just rubbing against her deepest wounds, and for her story with him to now be questioned, I can't imagine how much pain she's in. There's a lot of pain for her love story to not even be presented, and then for people to question that, and then her looks, and to question her standing with Joey as being one of the final 3. It just sucks. So I hope that her backlash this week, like, please everybody, let's just calm it down, send her some love, because homegirl needs it right now.
I need to calm down too. I'm like so activated. I just want to go to bat for her right now. But I think that's something that you're right. Like we can all do that. Like I think it's just like the easiest solution to this is just like shout your love for the fucking brown girls, the people of color on this show. Like shout your love. Like that's the easiest way to offset this bullshit. And I mean, I think that's the call to action when we have moments like this. That's the only way to respond. It's like, I'm glad we're having this conversation, and we usually don't get this fiery, but like I think this really touched a nerve for us. But
absolutely, we're watching a show that has traditionally been for white folks in America, and it does present that very classic all-American story. So, for people that are not interested in Rachel, that they don't like Rachel, examine if her skin tone plays a part in that. Examine if the way that production doesn't highlight any of that chemistry, any of that physical attraction, any of the kissing. If the show isn't highlighting that, then of course you might have some presumptions based on your underlying assumptions that you might be feeding into the conversation about can a brown girl be with a white boy? These are all things that are playing into it. So this is one of the reasons why, like, I do love watching The Bachelor, but it is one of the most outdated shows that we watch. Like, to be honest, like a lot of other dating shows I watch, racism plays a theme in it, but it's not as apparent, not as overt, and not as obvious as The Bachelor. The Bachelor is by far one of the most antiquated shows to acknowledge and lift up stories of diversity. They're trying, but they're not doing a good enough job. And Rachel is unfortunately a case in point that they're not doing a good enough job.
I think there's a little something for all of us to kind of take away from what happened here in terms of how we engage with the show. We're all fans. We are collectively creating the culture around The Bachelor and Bachelor Nation. What we say matters. What we say in the comments, what we say, in public settings, in these social media settings, it matters. And it affects the decisions that production makes. It affects the way we all feel, contestants feel, the way we talk about dating. It has an impact. And so I think we just all can be more sensitive and thoughtful about our language and the way that we talk about these people. That is all.
Thank you for listening, everybody, and let us know in the comments down below. Yeah, just let us know in the comments down below any of your thoughts. Let's get into a really thoughtful, kind conversation about, do you think that production does a good enough job like lifting up diverse love stories, and not just in a diversity inclusive way where it's like, oh, let's have like 5 black girls for a lead that maybe doesn't date black girls. Like, there has to be something about, like, do you see the show doing a good enough job? We saw it with Jen. We saw it with Rachel. Like, I want them to be the Bachelorettes. Do I feel like production is going to do a good enough job to understand the stories? No. But I would like to see some change. So let's all engage in a conversation this week. This was such an important episode for me and Kelly to talk about, and it's something that's so near and dear to us. I don't know, it was really disappointing to see this season.
Let's wrap it up here. Thank you all for being here and listening. Make sure that if you're not subscribed, you should be subscribed. Hit that subscribe button because we do this every single week. We are recapping every single episode of Joey's season, and we will be here for the Bachelorette season and the Golden Bachelorette seasons that are coming for us this year. Thanks for being here. Thanks for your support. We will see you next week. Bye.